Hello, everybody. Welcome to our special show on the Russia situation. I'm your host, Mitrakov, and joining me today are Abhijit Stalinovich and the Ghost Spot, whatever that means. So let's get started right away. Overnight, I was horrified to see just how quickly events moved in Russia. And now you have the mercenary group, they're called the Wagners, who are extremely active and are somewhat of whatever I'm reading about them, and Abhijit can tell me here, they're sort of heroes of sorts also because their leader, Yevgeny, I'm not even going to try and pronounce his last name, so I don't know him personally, but I'm just going to use his first name. There is this whole situation wherein he's actually speaking up for the army. There's been a lot of loss of life when it comes to the Russians. He's speaking for them, he's resonating for them, and now he's decided to march on Moscow. He's very clear that his problem is with the chief of defense staff who's handling the Ukraine fight, as well as who's the second person who he keeps calling out, Abhijit? There are two people. There are two main villains in his books. The
Shoigu and
defense minister. Yes, the defense
Shoigu is
minister,
the
the
defense
second
minister,
guy.
and Gerasimov is the commander in charge of the Ukraine front.
Correct. So
Okay,
he has
I
a
found
real
this on the web for who is the defense minister and Gerasimov is the command.
What is this? Someone's watching. Can you switch off your videos, please? Okay, thank you. So Abhijit, let's get right into it. Yevgeny he's quite a
Yeah,
character. In fact,
Yevgeny, not Yevgeny.
okay,
Yevgeny.
Yevgeny. Sorry, I'm just
Yevgeny
I'm
Prigozhin.
a wannabe Russian, Mitrakov. So
Yevgeny Prigozhin, and Yevgeny is the Russian version of Eugene.
Eugene. Okay, lovely. Now he's quite a character. He goes off on these rants on camera very often. In fact, initially everyone thought that it was a drunk rant. And then subsequently they realized when they started seeing images of this security installation of the Russian army surrounded by the Wagners, the mercenary group, they realized that this man is serious. So I'm going to start with you, Abhijit. How serious is he?
Listen, this is very serious, okay? Make no mistake about it, because you know what? I'm actually going to share my screen with you because I want you guys to see what has happened so far. Okay. Now, this started sometime last night. Okay. And isme mein ek second. Let me do a present share screen. Uh, Google Maps share. Now, I want you to check, Isme, can you see my Google Maps?
No, I can't.
I've shared my screen. You have to
Okay.
project.
Is there some way that I can permit you to share the screen? No, we can't see your Google Map.
But I've shared it. So you have to do something on your side.
Oh, wait, I can see it now.
Yeah.
There we are. Here we go.
Okay, so
Go
now
ahead.
if you see that this is Voronezh, which is the town that this man has captured, that Prigozhin has captured, its distance from Ukraine is about, from the Ukrainian border, is about 200 kilometers. Okay.
Hmm.
And if you look at its distance from Moscow, so if I
Mhm.
tap at Voronezh and ask for directions or to Moscow, you see it's just about 500 odd kilometers,
Okay.
right?
So on that M4, that road M4, how long
Right.
would it take them?
Now, what's happened is that this is like they have already covered 200 kilometers in
Hmm.
like 10 hours after Prigozhin announced that he was launching his mutiny. Okay. From everything I'm hearing right now from my friends in Moscow, there is no ground military resistance to Prigozhin.
Hmm.
They're somewhere outside Lipetsk right now, which is here. And if you look at the distance from there to Lipetsk, it's something like, let me measure this for you. इसमें measuring tool कहाँ पे है? Yes, measure. Oh, okay. Let me measure from Voronezh to Lipetsk. See, they've already crossed since this morning when they took Voronezh. They've already crossed 124 kilometers to Lipetsk. They're moving very fast. There is no ground resistance. Okay. Now remember, these guys are hardened mercenaries.
Yeah.
They're being augmented by hardened criminals. The troops that were left behind in Russia to protect Russia were all conscripts because, well, there's nothing happening in Russia. It's a peaceful country. So there's several different things. On one hand, Russian troops are not wanting to kill fellow Russians, especially not a war hero who's done Mother Russia's bidding in Africa, in Syria, and in Ukraine. Plus, they're conscripts, so even if they try, they're going to be demolished. The only people attacking them are the Russian Air Force. They've already shot down about 4 or 5 planes of the Russian Air Force, incidentally. And the only reason the Russian Air Force is attacking is because, they were out of the war after the first 2-3 months of the war. By June, July, the involvement of the Russian Air Force had virtually stopped because they were losing so many planes. So remember, they lost about 200-300 aircraft. They were allowed to retreat by Putin, no consequences, and the poor ground troops were made to fight without air cover. Okay? So he has lost about 20-30,000 ground troops. So the army is furious. See, they don't, historically in Russia, if you remember Tsar Peter III, his mother, Tsarina Yelizaveta, had crushed Frederick the Great, surrounded Berlin. So, Stalin's sack of Berlin wasn't the first time Berlin had been surrounded. 300 years before that, Tsarina Yelizaveta had also surrounded Berlin. And this fellow, Peter III, was such an idiot that he gave back everything to Frederick the Great, the so-called Great, who was a terrible loser, incidentally. And this is when his wife, Catherine, had him killed, deposed him, and installed herself. The same thing happened with Tsar Nicholas Romanov II. He was weak, he was effete, he couldn't deal with things, and he was deposed, and with his entire family, he was shot and his bones dissolved in acid and thrown down a Siberian coal mine or whatever. Russia does not tolerate weak rulers. They don't mind nasty rulers like Stalin, my father, hence my name Abhijit Stalinovich, who killed many millions of Russians, but he won a war and he was ruthless. So all of this Putin talk of, Ukrainians are our brothers, kisi, huggy, huggy. And, being your brother doesn't matter much to the Russian army. If you're their brothers, they'll kill about 1 lakh of you. If you're their enemy, they'll kill about 3-4 lakhs of you. That's the only great difference. Because, the Russian system is not a very precise military system. It's like destroy everything kind of a system. So this is not looking good. Remember, this man has been making these threats since the 16th of this month. Clearly, somebody in Moscow gave him the go-ahead to do this. He has support from Moscow. There is a reason that ground units are not engaging. Okay,
No, but then he is also called Putin's man. That's how he's known.
But
So
are you
that makes
watching his Telegram channel? I highly recommend everybody watch his Telegram channel, because he's saying Putin has signed his own death warrant by not getting rid of these incompetent people, Gerasimov and Shoigu.
okay. So he's turning now.
Now, here's the problem. If Putin gets rid of Gerasimov and Shoigu, then Putin will have to take all the blame himself. He can't scapegoat Gerasimov and Shoigu. Okay, so no, I don't think this is Putin's man. He has been very bitter with Putin for a very long time now.
Sandeep, coming to you, I'm sure you've been tracking this as well. What are your initial comments on what's happening?
No, if they're calling it a revolt, it's certainly a revolt. And how my worry is to how far this revolt is a genuine revolt against his disenchantment towards Russia, and Putin and his entourage, to what extent this is being used by anti-Russian forces, whether this is a new front they have opened, because ultimately mercenaries are all they have just a price tag. So if the anti-Russian forces have raised their ticket price, and whether that has been happening on the sidelines or behind the scenes, that's not something I would rule out. And if that's happened, that this is a major, major move. At the same time, I don't think it can be that Putin would not have had some intelligence inputs of this happening. He would have been totally blinded by that, and there would not be, they may have, the timing may have taken him by surprise, but that there won't be any retaliation or resistance is highly unlikely. Now, whether it means by removal of his defense guy or how it is, I don't think Putin would really worry much about that. His survival is much more important. And as Abhijit himself said, Russians don't like a weak leader. If he comes out of this looking stronger, even by removing his defense chief, he would do that rather than worry about who's getting the blame, as long as he has a solution for it. That's my very laymanish interpretation.
So, Abhijit, the Wagners are basically 25,000 men. That's how that's their strength on the ground.
No,
Now,
they're much bigger. They're like 50, 60,000 now. They've vastly increased their
they
numbers.
lost 30,000 men, and that was the beginning of
Russians have
the.
lost about 30,000 men. They are now at about 50, 60,000 men.
Okay.
They've been augmented by convicts and new recruits.
Correct.
Hardened convicts, incidentally.
And hardened, like including rapists and
look, Russian hardened convicts are the next level of hardened convicts. Please remember.
Yeah. And I think part of his angst. God, you are really taking after Stalin. Part of his angst was really the fact that they were not getting ammunition. I watched some of his videos. He was very impassioned. He was very passionate. He uses language like Abhijit uses on the show to in his messages, where he says F this and all of that, and abuses the defense minister and people like that directly, and says where these, and you can feel his angst, because he says that my men are also fathers and they are also sons, and we're short of 70% ammunition. So what has been happening, according to him, is that the Wagner group is not getting ammunition to the extent that they should be. And because of that, his men are being killed. And that is really the root of this disagreement or this outrage. He's very much for the war with Ukraine. He's not against that. This is really where his anger is coming from. And very recently, there is a post where the Wagner group did really well. Abhijit, that starts with a B, the name of that area. Brampot or certain Bakhmut, where he has been credited. So they've become kind of like local legends also in Russia, as being brave and strong and really going out there and fighting for the motherland. So I think the difference is really going to be whether the Russian forces, and we don't know what's happening on the ground. It's all conjecture at this point. It's very confusing. But if the Russian forces are laying down their arms or joining him, that's when it's going to get really problematic out in Moscow.
Well, we know exactly what's happening in Russia right now, because our satellite imagery doesn't work over Ukraine, but it works fine over Russia. They're, like I said, they're outside Lipetsk, and I don't know when Lipetsk will fall. I don't know if they'll even go into Lipetsk, but we're not seeing much by way of resistance. Every place where the resistance is posted, they've just let them through without engaging. Right?
Yeah.
Quite the contrary. It's the only people engaging the Wagner have been the Russian Air Force, and we've already counted about 4 shoot downs by Wagner of the Russian Air Force. Plus, the Russians are bombing. The Russian Air Force is bombing targets, their own oil depots and things like that in places like Voronezh, to prevent Wagner from getting fuel and things like that. Okay. Now, remember, Wagner is even more to the right of Putin. So, I'm actually quite surprised the West is celebrating this, because it's like a fight between the hard right and the ultra hard right. Okay. And in that, you really don't want Prigozhin winning this. Because if Prigozhin wins this, he'll probably, the classic Soviet tactic. Why did Russia have so many nuclear weapons, especially tactical nuclear weapons? Because the Soviet doctrine was that when you were up against superior Western quality, you would use nuclear weapons to bring parity into the battlefield. It was that simple. And Soviet war doctrine, when you read through it, they did not see the use of tactical nuclear weapons as something very special. It was just seen as a sort of upgrading of a normal battlefield war. It was just a shell falling or a bomb falling with a bigger than normal yield. That is how they looked at it. That is how they were trained to look at it. So, this was one of those things which was there was a low likelihood of it going nuclear. The longer this prolonged, the more it was going to get nuclear, but still a low likelihood of going nuclear. The problem now is the likelihood of the Ukraine situation becoming nuclear just went through the roof. And I'll tell you why. Because on one hand, Prigozhin's entire prastava to his to the Russian people is that Putin doesn't care about you. He doesn't care how many of you die. I'm the one that cares about you. And the only way you can do it with the current state of the Russian military is go back to old Soviet doctrine and use tactical nuclear weapons. Okay. On the other hand, assume Putin wins this round against Prigozhin. What ends up happening is Putin is now stuck in a very, very difficult situation. He realizes the longer this war continues, the more the morale. This is a collapse of morale at the front. This is like those First World War mutinies. First World War mutinies never became this big. It's like it's essentially like this whole 1917 revolt of the Bolsheviks in the back, and this is what Putin referred to during his own speech. And in that situation now, Putin is very hard pressed. He either accepts defeat and withdraws, or he has to break the stalemate. So the probability of it doesn't matter who the president of Russia now is or who wins this round. The probability of the use of nuclear weapons to break the stalemate, either in a strategic capacity or in a tactical capacity. And this is basically jargon for saying strategic means it's I'm going to kill your cities, and tactical means I'm going to kill your armies. But it's going to be used.
Yeah.
It's going to.
Yeah. And he's sort of, he's taken out that, there is always this morality question that hangs over mercenaries. He's kind of diluted that because he's been on the outside. He's been going and meeting with, Wagner's slain or soldiers. He's been meeting their daughters, the wives. He's been putting wreaths on their graves. He's been then following this up with this very passionate discourse and video dispatches where he's speaking directly to the Russian people and saying, look what they're doing with us, and young men are dying, and very, very kind of emotional sort of pitch to the Russian people. I think that is he's also working to a certain plan.
Look, he's definitely working to some kind of a plan. I don't know if it'll succeed or if it won't succeed. That is the whole point. Because at what point will Russian commanders say enough is enough? Remember, the coup against Gorbachev was allowed to continue for almost a week before they said enough is enough, and then removed all the coupsters, and Boris Yeltsin took over. Boris Yeltsin took over the next day. He sacked Gorbachev and declared the independence of all the other republics within the USSR. That is how Ukraine didn't even want its independence at that point of time, if you remember, right? Ukraine was actually more Soviet than Russia was at that point of time. So this is something we don't know what this man is up to. But remember, he is nasty. He is, you can troll Twitter for videos. You will get videos of him smashing. The way he executes people who try to betray him, or certain prisoners of war or certain deserters, is to put their heads on a chopping block and smash their heads in with a hammer on TV. He does it himself, by the way. He smashes their arms, he cracks their legs, and mostly he smashes their skulls in with a hammer. This is not a nice guy. He's going to make Putin look like a liberal. So if the West is celebrating this, like I said, congratulations to you, President Biden. You get what you deserve.
But you think he will try to upstage Putin?
I do.
Or is,
I do. See,
or
he
is there
started
somebody
off
else?
this starts off exactly like the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution. You remember the Russian Revolution, the first thing was in 1905, where they did not believe the Tsar was so cruel to them. So they all assembled outside the Winter Palace and sang God Save the Tsar, hoping that the Tsar would intervene against all these corrupt knaves. That is why there's that famous line in the second or third stanza of God Save the Queen. Frustrate their politics, destroy their knavish tricks, on thee our hopes we fix, God save the Queen. So it was always the politicians doing it. The Tsar is always above this. Putin is above this. It's Gerasimov and Shoigu and these people doing it. But you look at the latest messages coming on his Telegram channel. He's saying Putin has signed his death warrant. These two useless quacks should have been dismissed. Instead, he gave them medals, and hundreds of our boys have died. What? To maintain the careers of two third-raters. Putin is as guilty as these two. He's been getting extremely bitter with Putin as well. Putin, what happened to the Tsar? That's exactly what he's planning on doing to Putin.
Oh gosh, yeah, and he's talking about corruption and about the fact that people are buying their way, and these top army guys are doing all of this, letting their young die because they want more stars. So he's really kind of going after it with an emotional pitch, which I think is resonating. I think it would resonate considering the war has been going on for over a year now, and there has been so much loss of life and suffering.
It's a mixed thing, because if you look at what's been happening in Rostov and Voronezh, they've been coming out, the older citizens who probably remember the Second World War have been coming out and saying things like, why the hell are you doing this? This is not right. Go back. This is not who we are, etc., etc. Remember, all these cities, Rostov, Voronezh, these were, I think Rostov as well, were under Soviet occupation, were under German occupation. And the Germans were nasty, absolutely nasty out there, right? So what happens is that, you can, these people remember. But you look at the younger generation, which is what the troops are made of, they are not willing to fight Prigozhin at all. Their thing is that he's right. I mean, these incompetent generals have killed us. If we don't oppose them, then more of us will die. Screw Putin, support Prigozhin. So it's been a very different reaction based on the age demographic.
Yeah, so we get that he is brutal. My question to both of you is, how good of a military strategist is he?
Sandeep, do you want to go first?
Yeah, military strategist, if he is that good, I don't think he would have been operating with a mercenary troop of that sense. He would definitely know, but it's more like I see a large regiment revolting. Where it could be a very powerful regiment, it could be a big, there, but for him to take on mighty Russia as just by himself, I think that's, to me, again, as an uninitiated defense analyst, I'm not by any stretch, is difficult to believe. So he must be having support from within Russia, people who have been anti-Putin forces, who have been, working with him in collaboration secretly, or more likely, I think, having failed on everything else, the NATO powers have, are operating through him, have bought him off and operating through him, and he is trying to make the most of it. But what surprises me most that Putin, for everything, he didn't have a clue that this was coming. Not for that matter, anybody else. Everybody seemed to be just happy with the status quo and expecting this to carry on for several years, just like Afghanistan or Iran, Iraq before this. Here, that this would be suddenly precipitated. I would think that I don't think even America is capable of running such a secret operation.
Okay. Abhijit, the same question to you. How good of a strategist is he? He is a war hero, like you mentioned. He may be a mercenary now, but he does have experience on the war battlefield. And maybe if he is an outlier, if he is a bit of a maverick, he has a real problem with establishment. That's clear because he's written them all off as corrupt, self-serving a lot of people. So how good of a strategist will he be? Because right now, if you just look at it from a layperson's perspective, they're going down this highway, this convoy, the M4. They're being tracked. Obviously, if we can track them sitting here and check that route, the Russians definitely know, where they're heading, how many of them are there. So are they sitting ducks, or is there strategy even behind this?
Look, Prigozhin is a fantastic tactician. Okay, I won't call him a strategist. He's like all special forces commanders. He's a tactician, and he's a fantastic tactician. He goes in where Russian troops cannot. He does what Russian troops cannot, and his level of training is next level. Right now, he's got about 50,000 crack troops under him, extremely well trained. Think of all of them as special force level. Okay, so that's about 2 divisions worth of, we're not talking regiments here anymore. We're literally talking this is like 2 legions of the Praetorian Guard in ancient Rome. This is 2 divisions heavily armed with the best weapons, because these guys used to travel abroad. They used to operate on the international black market and buy the best of everything. Right? They have a much higher equipment standard than the normal Russian army. They are not given general issue crap. So this guy is very dangerous. It all depends now, and he's been planning this. It's been very clear that he's been planning this for almost 2 weeks now. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, we can say that he's planning it because the smoothness with which it has gone off. He's already out of the distance of about 700 kilometers between Moscow and where he was. He's already covered about 300 kilometers of that distance within less than 24 hours of taking over, of launching the rebellion. Right. So the question now is, what are the forces that will be arrayed against him, or rather arrayed against him? How will they be brought to Moscow? Because the crack troops were all south on the Ukraine border. Will bringing them to the north disrupt the whole Ukraine front? It most probably will, because to fight 2 divisions of special forces, we're not even talking battalions, we're talking 2 divisions worth of special forces out here. You need serious firepower and manpower. If you're going to use conscripts, then you need about 50, 60, 70,000 conscripts with tanks, with artillery, with armor. Where is that all going to come from? How soon is it going to be mobilized and sent into? And these guys are fighting like they're going on trucks. If you notice, they're not using big tanks and things like that. They're using wheeled armored vehicles and things like that, which are much easier to take around. Could you please stop putting all these questions right now while I'm talking? It's really irritating. Just put it down now. I don't want to see anything on the screen right now.
All right, Stalin. Okay.
Yeah. So so this guy is not going to be so easy to defeat. This is going to be a very, very difficult fight. And if you're going by what I'm seeing, this will be the Air Force coming after uh, Prigozhin, and that too in such a half-hearted way. Even the Air Force isn't unleashing its full power on Prigozhin. That said, I do think Prigozhin has seriously underestimated Russian state power. But the the application of that state power will be at an extremely heavy cost in Ukraine. You
Which
could
brings me to
see a
which brings
collapse
me
you could see a Russian front collapse of something like 100 to 150 kilometers, possibly, before Prigozhin is reined in.
Which brings me to Ukraine. They are quiet as of now, but they will obviously be watching this with great interest. And like you're saying, they will probably anticipate some sort of collapse along the lines that what you've suggested. The Secretary Blinken, the Americans have responded by getting in touch with the G7 nations. The British are doing their Cobra meeting with their foreign secretary. So, you are seeing some sort of movement going on in Europe and the Western powers, so to speak, while they address the situation. What are the odds that, being a mercenary, and like Sandeep suggested, he may be in with NATO and the Americans?
Sorry, could you repeat that question? You asked such long questions, I forget what you asked by the time
God. Basically, the question is, what are the chances?
Krishna reciting the Bhagavad Gita at the Dharmakshetre, Kurukshetre.
Okay.
Or in your case,
What are the odds? What are the odds that, like Sandeep suggested, he could be in with NATO and the Americans, etc.?
I don't. Quite the contrary. Quite the contrary. This is why I said, if Prigozhin succeeds or is succeeding, NATO might want to protect Putin. Between Putin and Prigozhin, Putin is just infinitely better. Putin might use nuclear weapons in 3-4 months on the battlefield. Prigozhin will use it within 3 weeks. Okay, so Putin is not a psycho. Prigozhin is a genuine psycho. He's a sick, sadistic psycho. It seems very hard for this. Has the CIA, now let's differentiate. Sandeep is right in that the CIA has been working very hard to achieve something like this. They're just not counting that it would have been Wagner, because Wagner is a bit like, Stalin replacing Hitler. Stalin was a much bigger threat to the West than Hitler ever was. It's that simple. So be careful what you wish for.
Sandeep, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask Abhijit. So how do you think, not just the G7 or others, or even someone like India, is going to react to this situation? Will they throw their lot behind Putin because thinking Putin is a lesser evil than this guy? Or they'll just let situation play out?
They're going to let the situation play out. I think what the West is aiming for now is maximum tactical gains on the Ukraine front. They're waiting to see how much the Russian front in Ukraine collapses or gets weakened. And this is where the counteroffensive comes in right now. Counteroffensive stalled very badly. It was going nowhere. The Ukrainians have lost huge quantities in the last 10 or so days since the counteroffensive began. And now what's happening is more about almost a month since the counteroffensive began. But they will look to gain as much tactical advantage as possible. And that's about it. I think it's a very short-term goal that they have right now.
Tell me something. What sort of factionalism exists in the Russian army? There must be factionalism. What can you explain that a little bit to us, for us?
Sorry, what kind of factionalism within the Russian army?
Yeah.
Well, look, there isn't factionalism within the Russian army to the extent that we've seen, because remember, Prigozhin is a mercenary organization outside the Russian army. This is why we are very careful about mercenaries in any country. America has a company called Blackwater that used to do this kind of shit in Iraq. But for a country like Russia to have 50,000 troops like this, loaded up with ammo within Russia, is unprecedented and unheard of. They did it so that, it was kind of a semi state intervention in Africa and Syria and things like that. Okay. And they were meant to be the crack troops. So, what ends up happening is when you have a militia like this that is completely independent of the military chain of command, further augmented by your worst kind of hardened criminals, not a very good idea. There is something called the monopoly of violence, which is meant to be vested exclusively in the state. When you dilute the monopoly of violence, which is vested exclusively in the state, you end up with coups and mutinies like this.
So the obvious answer is that they did take on groups like Wagner because they go into places where the Russian army would not. What
No,
other
they would.
reasons would there
The
be?
Russian army would have gone in there.
Mhm.
This was so that army retirees, experienced army retirees, would not get violent without jobs on the streets of Moscow, that you find foreign interventions for them to be used up, to get paid well, to get to be a sort of think of it the way Pakistan uses terrorists, but that's not a very good analogy. It's more like um, Russia is helping you without helping you. All the benefits of helping you without the pitfalls of helping you. Plus, keeping very violent military trained men off the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg and places like that.
So now they've sort of circled Moscow. They've set up machine guard stations.
No,
They're
not
waiting.
Moscow yet.
Well,
Russian
that's what the
troops,
news is saying.
Russian
That's what the
troops have set up cordons
The
around
Russian,
Moscow.
yeah, the Russian troops. I'm talking about them. That's what they've done.
The Citadel Protocol has been employed, which is the protocol for dealing with when Moscow comes under a terror attack.
When was the last time that happened?
Never.
Never,
Possibly
right?
during the Gorbachev coup, but I think not even then. I don't think so. There was no time for it before the coup happened. So what's happened is that there's a lot of this is the first time people have seen that kind of a thing in Moscow ever. It's not a protocol that had been used before. 3 of my friends' flats now have armed people on their roofs with shoulder-fired anti-tank missiles and anti-aircraft missiles and anti-aircraft guns. The remaining 3 of them have confirmed in their buildings. The remaining have seen in some other buildings, but it's impossible to triangulate how many buildings have been taken over by the forces still loyal to Putin, and if they'll actually use those things. Because remember, they've taken over civilian buildings. Prigozhin will not want to attack civilian buildings, and these guys also will not want to have their own people used as human shields.
Yeah. Yeah. And what is the advisory for citizens? Are your friends, for example, been told to stay indoors, lock up?
Everybody's been told to stay indoors, and all events have been cancelled. Surprisingly, the Indian embassy was hosting an event out there today. Very well attended event, apparently. It was quite the success.
What kind of event were they hosting, and talk about timing?
I think it was some cultural Indian dance and food festival. 1 second, let me just check.
So ICCR.
Dance festival without Arjal is bit of
let's see. Let me just check. It's somewhere here. It's called Namaste Moscow, and it's a festival of Indian culture. Yeah.
So I hope they said regret to inform you.
Let me just quickly play the. Yeah, let me just quickly play this thing. Let me do present screen. share screen and this thing.
For the event.
Yeah, for the event.
Live event.
Abeg yaar. No, not this. What is this? This I need to put in something else. YouTube.
Oh, okay.
YouTube.com.
Guys, he's not answering your question because he's busy tweeting as well as WhatsApping at the same time. Okay,
No, I'm following what the hell is happening out there. Namaste Moscow 2020.
Right. Also, please
Oh, yeah.
subscribe to the channel. We need to hit 50K soon, so please go ahead and do that. Share the stream if you like the stream, because you all don't ever like the stream, and I never tell you all to either. So I'm doing it now. And
Can
here
you see
we are.
Namaste Moscow now?
Yeah. You'll need to expand it. Trust you to not have YouTube Premium.
Another video of MBS info. So, आप अगर अभी मॉस्को सिटी में
Oh God, we do not have a tie-up with MBBS. Okay,
Yeah.
इसके बारे में शोकेस किया जाएगा.
Okay, यार, when is
कल्चर और इंडिया में जो ट्रेडिशंस
Namaste Moscow Festival
होते हैं हमारे कल्चर
2023. Okay, India and Russia. All right.
काफी सारे जो बेसिकली रशियन सिटीज में भी कर सकते हैं.
Yeah, this is the promo
So
video.
अगर आप in Moscow on 24th June, I would definitely invite you to join this event because it is really a great opportunity for you being in a foreign country. So अभी हम एक चलते हैं Indian restaurant. So Moscow city में basically काफी
No,
सारे
the embassy is actually hosting.
like 7 to 10.
Find a better one.
But the thing is, did you hear what he said? He said it's a great opportunity for you to be in a foreign country.
It's fantastic, isn't it? But
It's just
yeah,
bad timing. We don't mean to, mock this thing, but it's just bad timing.
just bad timing, man.
If there was ever bad timing, this is it. Oh God. Anyway, yes, Sandeep, you wanted to come in. Sandeep insisted on joining this conversation, by the way.
I was just saying something. No, I was saying that I wouldn't sort of jump into these conclusions. I think it's a bit premature. We need to see Ukraine. The entire conflict has its twists and turns right from the beginning. It's been a seesaw kind of a situation. I personally don't think Putin can be so callous or
easily dislodged.
Clueless. So one will need to watch. And as Abhijit says, if this guy is really that dangerous, the West could be creating its own Frankenstein by trying to replace Putin with him. That's what I would conclude at this juncture.
So, Abhijit, how everybody, whatever I've been watching in the news, and frankly, the Western media is covering it a lot more than we are here. So, I've been watching a lot of the Western media, and that comes with a certain lens on the situation. So, I'll go ahead and say that as a caveat before I ask my next question. But the next couple of days, how soon are we going to see some resolution or confrontation or what have you? When do you, is it a minute by minute, hour by hour situation, or do we wait for them to actually get to Moscow and then face what they're going to face over there?
Look, there's no way of predicting this. You don't know which general and which general's troops will agree to fire on Prigozhin. There's just no way of saying that at the moment, unless you're the CIA and you've intercepted communications at the moment. So based on OSINT, we can't say anything, right? Because even troops that are moving to oppose Prigozhin are laying down their arms.
Are you sure?
Yeah, they're not laying down their arms because we're seeing troop buildups, and we're seeing no fighting, and we're seeing Prigozhin go past them without a single shot being fired. They're not joining Prigozhin, but they're not stopping him either. Right? So boss, it's not so easy saying how this is going to unfold. There are way too many variables here, and the problem with Russia is the reporting on this has been completely curtailed. So we're operating in an information lacuna.
And what is the India impact? One of our viewers is asking, is there an India impact even? I don't see it in the immediate.
कुछ नहीं. See, the impact on India is zero. Even if the Ukraine situation goes nuclear, the impact on India will be zero. Okay, because all the countries that needed to draw the line drew the line between February and June 2022. All the sanctions have been exhausted. Now, the problem of using all your weapons on the first day of the war is that you have nothing left for the 10th day of the war. So the West did whatever it could on the first day of the war or the first few months of the war. And now what do you have left? Where is the pressure left to apply anymore? Okay. So nothing is happening here anymore. The Russians, for all you care, can use tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine and kuch nahi hoga. Recursion can take over, kuch nahi hoga. The relation with India will remain unchanged because the constraints that Putin operates under is what the same constraint that Prigozhin will operate under, except he might be militarily much more willing to use nuclear weapons. He's, in fact, as I understand it, he's been asking for that kind of intervention for a very long time because it's his boys, right?
And the wider question, the wide angle question, to use a cinematic term, do you think this will precipitate and lead to the eventual Third World War that a lot of people are now sort of talking about, and necessitate involvement of other countries? For example, if the Wagner group gets too hard to handle, would the Russians bring in the Chinese?
No. One second. Let's go. Your problem is you make these questions so big, I forget where it started.
That's your problem.
Bad short-term memory.
It's actually your problem. Then it's the
short-term gajni. Go ahead.
So what happens is, why were these Baltic countries and Poland so eager, and Romania so eager on getting Ukraine into NATO? So that they would not be the first port of call of Russian troops invading the West. They wanted to move the border east because they wanted one more buffer state between them and Russia. Okay. One more big threat so that the small threat would not be attacked. In the case of the 3 Baltic states and in the case of Romania and the other countries, it was one more buffer that they could afford. So what has happened in all of this now is NATO will fight to the last Ukrainian man, woman, and child. But ultimately, when it comes down to this, assume this thing in Ukraine goes nuclear. Is to save Warsaw, do you think America is going to sacrifice Washington? Because to save Warsaw, if America uses a nuclear weapon against Russia, Russia will not target Europe. Russia will then target America. And that weapon will land in, I don't know, Harrisburg, Virginia, or Orange County, California, or Columbus, Ohio, or something like that. Do you really think any NATO country, do you think to save Kiev or Lviv, Poland is going to sacrifice Warsaw? The West will do nothing. You will see a lot of these think tankers saying, oh, we should carry out a sort of a focused strike on Russian forces to say this is not okay. Look, a lot of these think tankers write shit. Okay. The Americans and not one single country in NATO will intervene, period. Even if this goes nuclear. Because understand the consequences of intervention in a war. Russia has already reached the end of its tether going nuclear in this. This is not a bear that you want to attack at this point. Okay, the more desperate the country, the higher the chances of nuclear usage. So I would discard any option of NATO direct intervention immediately. Weapons, sure, they'll open bhandar khol denge. You take what planes you want, you take what bombs you want, what you ask for, you get short of nuclear weapons, sure. Troops, no. Direct intervention, no. Pilots, no. Retired pilots, sure. Serving pilots, no.
Okay, now here's the other question. What if there is an intervention from Western nations that is helpful to Putin? and to get him to then agree to certain concessions when it comes to Ukraine and to resolve that situation. Because you're okay, and Sandeep and you both can answer.
No, just one question from to Abhijit. You said there is no impact on India. Militarily, no. But what happens economically? Because Putin, we have had a good equation with Putin during this entire war scene, and don't you think that equation can get very badly upset if, in at least in the short term, when this guy takes over, or there is instability, not this guy taking over, there is instability, all the kind of economic agreements we were reaching, and sort of that helped us tide through the Ukraine crisis.
Because nothing will change. Russian state policy to India will be the same. You remember when the coup against Gorbachev happened, uh, the Indian parliament did not pass the resolution condemning the coup till 13 days later when the coup was defeated. It was after the coup leaders were arrested and thrown in jail that parliament passed a resolution condemning the coup. So what will happen is, for the first 20 days to a month, we will do nothing. And then there will be a normalization of relations. There is going to be no break in trade. We're still going to procure huge quantities of Russian oil. We are still going to do whatever is required in the Indian interest, and Russia is going to do what's in the Russian interest. Because it doesn't matter who changes in government, either in India or in Moscow. India's interest is to keep Russia away from China, and Russia's interest is to diversify its limited number of friends beyond China. So in the short run, I think the only real impact, and this is a short run impact, I want to stress that, would be maybe if Prigozhin decides to go ape shit on Ukraine using conventional weapons, weapons deliveries to us might be slowed down. And that's about it.
Oil?
Oil kahan slow hoga? Russia has all the oil in the world. They have more than enough, more than what their troops need. And they can get a lot more money for it in India.
Okay, and that we had one or two questions which I just want to bring to you. Actually, there's just this one where which I've asked you.
Concessions, yeah. And the other one, Naman Kandapal asked, blitzkrieg-like tactics by Wagner. No, these aren't blitzkrieg-like tactics. See, blitzkrieg is joint operations. There are no joint operations happening out here. Wagner is operating mostly on the ground. And then Tejas Sonaje, okay, that was a comment. And where is Ramzan Kadyrov? Ramzan Kadyrov is in Rostov. Ramzan Kadyrov is in Rostov. We suspect he's going to attack the safe base that, because Rostov is the other big city. Rostov-na-Donu is the other big city that Wagner captured. And apparently Kadyrov's forces are being, they're preparing to engage Wagner in Rostov.
And this is sort of a morbid question, but one is assuming that the Russians don't want to kill Russians, right? So can we then hope that there won't be too much bloodshed coming up, or everything is on the table right now?
See, Russians don't want to kill Russians, but Russians end up killing a lot of Russians. Stalin was responsible for something like 40-50 million Russian deaths. Stalin was responsible for more Russians getting killed than Hitler was. Of course, you can say Stalin was Georgian, which is true. My beloved father was Georgian. I'm Georgian, not... and, Georgia is where the great Aryan mother race invaded all you black native savages from to civilize you. Like Sandeep would not be wearing the coat were it not for my ancestors 3,500 years back coming to civilize his ancestors. And, similarly...
Now here's when we close the show,
you would be eating raw meat. You wouldn't even know the fire were it not my ancestors who brought the Vedas to you.
But did you see, Advaita, the comment about you said that nowadays you're looking more like Barkha Dutt, but with a golden heart. I don't know how did they get to see your heart, but that was the comment. I must mention this to Barkha.
Yes, we must.
Yeah, I hope everyone's liking the more professional look of the show, with my background and things like that.
You really need to get rid of
But
that horrible
why
that
did
you
you
came
need to
up
make
with.
it professional? We were
Well,
good as we were.
because I mean, we should get more professional. That's respectful to our viewers, and we will be back
That
tomorrow on
tone
the
was
Sunday
not
Club.
respectful to your viewers, not remotely.
Okay, we'll be back tomorrow on the
It
Sunday Club, and
sounded like the beginning of a porn video.
Terrible. Just because you've come back from Kerala,
yeah.
looking all trim doesn't mean that you're that attractive as yet.
Alas, I have many miles to go, many more miles to go.
Okay, we will be back tomorrow with the Sunday Club. We're going to discuss the Prime Minister's visit to the US. I think that's going to be a fun discussion. We'll have a full panel. Abhijit, Sandeep, are you joining us or no?
Would love
Tomorrow,
to, in
Sunday Club.
case you need to at least invite me. Abhijit is a permanent guest. In any case, star. He's this main attraction
Here
of
we
your
go
show.
again.
But
The
what's
politics,
topic
the
in
politics,
Bharat?
the politics of envy is really high with this group. I just have to say
And
that. Be it
what about
or be
Pallavi
it
Ghosh?
it's horrible. But Abhijit, are you going to join us tomorrow? We have some very interesting guests, of course, everyone, but even Gautam Chinkarmane is joining us.
What are we discussing?
We're discussing Prime Minister Modi's visit to the US, and we're going to be talking about the opposition
Yes,
Mahagathbandhan.
I will bring the Bengali perspective on the perspective of the Bengali Bhadralok on Prime Minister Modi's visit to USA.
Which reminds me, how's Kanchanda? Because I messaged him, I didn't hear back, but I'm
Hey,
assuming
Kanchanka
he's
is
resting
doing
up.
very well. He's
Okay,
out of
great.
hospital. He's back home, but he's taking rest. No visit allowed
Sure.
because you have to be sterile for a while. So till full recovery happens, he is going to be at home.
Lovely.
Good.
And everybody, do remember to like, share this video if you enjoyed it. That's what motivates us and brings us back here every evening. At 7 is a new initiative. If you all are encouraging of it and watch it, then I'll be doing it very regularly. I can promise you that. And I really think that it helps because there's so much going on in the world right now and lots to talk about. So thank you, everybody, for watching. And we'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. for the Sunday Club. Bye for now.
Bye. Thanks. It was